everything from his papers to get into the military and out of the military back in the 50s, or I guess early 60s, to every bank that he has. And so when he did die about 5 years ago, we went to the funeral home and they want to write up an obit. We just said, here you go. And we handed them, and they had every piece of information you'd ever want to know about my dad was contained in one place. And he did that because he wanted to make it easy for everybody else. So this idea that you talked about of, facing death as an adult, that's the standard I'm trying to live up to. I don't know if I can do it, but even when he was on his deathbed and knew he had, 3 days to live, he wasn't worried or freaking out that he was going to die. He was upset that he wasn't there to keep taking care of us.
That's absolutely. I mean, I didn't, of course, talk about that story because I just heard it, but that's a theme that runs throughout the book, is the way that a lot of the research that I did, even though it's not academic, related to looking at how people talk and react and think when they're on their deathbeds, and what stands out as being so important to them that in their last hours or days, that's what they feel like they need to communicate to people. And then taking that and saying, what does that tell us? Hopefully, I'm 50 or 60 or more years away from dying. And so what is that? I don't know how many I really have, but I have some fingers crossed about medical science. What does that tell me about how I should spend what time I have left?
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm trying to communicate in this book, because I really don't. I'll tell you, actually, a couple of years ago, I was writing the first draft of Everybody Was Wrong About God, and I was talking to my friend Pete Bogosian about it, and he said, unless you can find a way to address the promise that religion offers for dying, for death, the whole heaven thing, unless you can come up with a way for that, you will never talk people completely out of religion. And I looked there. Ingersoll wrote some very good stuff, for instance, about death and dying, but there's really not a lot that addresses it from a purely secular point of view, and from a point of view that says, let's really just stare at this for what it is and say see what it tells us about life.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, it's an attempt, I guess, if we want to stick in the theme of atheism, it's an attempt to take, not exactly coping with death, but in a way coping with the idea of death broadly, away from religion, and give it to everybody. I think one of the lines in there starts with something like, religion has no monopoly on human psychology, or something like that. And that's sort of a driving theme.
Sure. A totally different question for you, maybe. If there was a way for someone to know the exact date of your death personally, would you want to know it as well?
That's an interesting question. I feel often, I know it's a silly reference, but I often come back to this point where if you've read Tolkien and you've read The Lord of the Rings, maybe there's a line in there that's always kind of stuck with the way that I tend to think about it. Stuck out to me about the way I tend to think about things. It says, never ask the elves for advice because they'll say both yay and nay. And so I feel that way. I see both sides of it. I can see why I would want to know, and I can also see why I wouldn't. And so I don't know which side of that wins.
Yeah, I don't know either. It just popped into my head, and I'm like, oh man. And so maybe that's something fun for the listeners to think about. If you personally could know, would you want to? I don't know where to leave it with that, but I know we're. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say we're getting short on time, so finish that thought and then tell everybody where they can reach you.
Great. So what I would say then is the interesting part of that isn't so much would you want to know, is to do the same kind of thing again that I did with this book, is to ask yourself, what can we learn about life? And so one of the things you can learn about life by thinking about that question is, if you did know the hour of your death, look at how it would rearrange your priorities look at how you would rearrange your use of time in recognition of that fact. Look at how it would make a difference if it was, 3 months from now in an accident, or if it were 30 years from now. And so you know what kind of time you have to play with. And exploring the various options on that could actually be really relevant and really useful to thinking about how you want to spend the time that you do have, not knowing when the end is coming. So people can reach me. The easiest way would be to reach me on Twitter. That's where I'm the most active. It's the only social media I really use. I am at God Doesn't. So GODDOESNT, no apostrophe. That was embarrassing trying to spell that on the fly out loud.
I can relate to your mathematician side. I'm a numbers person, and when people ask me to spell simple words, I kind of go because that's not my thing. I can do rapid fire math almost to the point of losing too many people, and I got to slow myself down. But James, Dr. James Lindsay, thank you so much for being on the Phil Ferguson Show. I greatly appreciate it, and I look forward to reading your new book and hearing all about that after it comes out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.